welcome to our fifth lecture on the history and development of ideas in East Asian medicine. This lecture is going to be about the medicine of systematic correspondences, which is the term given by Paul Unshold, the historian and sinologist who wrote the textbook that we're using in our course. And this is the name that he uses to describe the paradigm that underlies East Asian medicine. This is the paradigm behind it. So, the goal of this lesson is to understand the medicine of systematic correspondences. Let's jump into our lecture, into our PowerPoint. So, just a quick little overview of kind of some of the stuff we're going to be talking about during this video. Number one, we want to ask the question, what is the medicine of systematic correspondences according to Paul Unshold? So we're going to dig into that. We're going to learn more about that idea of his. We're also trying to understand how does the medicine of systematic correspondences kind of arise out of the natural philosophy that develops during the Warring States period. And that's the period that we were just talking about in a previous lecture of ours, when a lot of these naturalist philosophies are developed. And they kind of supplant and transform and take over the main worldview and the reality of the world of the people living during that time period, from the more ancestral and then demonological way of perceiving reality. Then we want to take a little bit of time and just look at the Huangde Neijing, which is the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic. And this is the most important book about East Asian medicine. It's like the original, most root text. It's the classic text that really sets the foundation of what is to be understood as East Asian medicine, and really the medicine of systematic correspondences. It's like the main text. And we also want to look at some of the various aspects, systems, applications of the medicine of systematic correspondences. We're going to look at some of that stuff, like the idea of yin yang, wu xing, qi, and finally we're going to look at some classic textual examples of the concept of qi in some of these texts. So let's look at 5 aspects of the medicine of systematic correspondences. These are 5 things that Paul Unshold identifies as like foundational to what he means by the medicine of systematic correspondences. And so we're going to be looking in this lecture at the first 4 of these, but then we're going to save the 5th one for our future lecture, which is going to be the 7th lecture in the series. We're going to take more of a look at this 5th one. So, but of the aspects of the medicine of systematic correspondences, Paul Unshold identifies 5. So the first one is a magical belief in the unity of nature. The second one has to do with yin yang and wu xing, which is the 5-phase theory. These are the 2 kind of most fundamental theories of systematic correspondences and kind of like the systems that plays out with. Then there's the concepts of demonic medicine, which we already overviewed in our lecture on the Zhou dynasty. So that kind of came earlier, but it's just part of the syncretic amalgamation of medicine of systematic correspondences of East Asian medicine. So he includes that in there. We're not really going to go over that one too much in this lecture because we've already covered that. But we are going to look a little bit at the concept of qi, which Paul Unshold, he defines qi as concepts of finest matter influence. So qi is the most finest influence possible. It's like it is the most important kind of functional element of the systematic correspondence. So it's like the basis of life. And so qi becomes really foundational in the medicine of systematic correspondence. And we want to take a look at that. We're going to look at some examples, maybe in some texts about where they start to bring up qi and the way that they talk. And that's going to be a really interesting thing because that kind of is where East Asian medicine is coming from. It's all coming from this tradition that's evolving through these natural philosophies and then ultimately into the Huangde Neijing and then beyond, as that becomes really the foundation for all of the future theorizing and concepts and theories that emerge out of the medicine of systematic correspondence. Basically, all of East Asian medicine, as we know of it today, it really kind of starts for the most part here. You know, we have those other things that kind of come in from the very, very, very ancient past with ancestors, spirits, demonic medicine, and that stuff's relevant. I don't want to put that down. But what we really kind of have come to know as the representative ideas of East Asian medicine is sort of like this paradigm of systematic correspondence. And so from now until basically the modern era, this is the starting point of the evolution as we know it of East Asian medicine. And we'll just mention one bit about Confucianism because Confucianism, in many ways, was an influential factor in the development and evolution of this. And we're going to really dig into Confucianism in our next lecture. We want to take a whole lecture and just kind of like learn a little bit about Confucianism itself. But Paul Unschold says that Confucianism was oriented completely around the organization of earthly social life. In place of divine or other transcendental laws, and this is like the spirits, demons, and gods that came in our previous lectures, Confucian political doctrine incorporated the theories of yin yang, and especially the five phases, to explain social and political changes. So, with the advent of Confucianism, as Confucianism comes to the forefront and really kind of like takes over the orthodox thinking of Chinese society, these are the lenses through which everyone starts to interpret reality, cosmology. How do we see the world? How do we interpret events in the world? Events like being healthy, getting sick. We start to interpret medicine through the lenses of yin and yang, through qi, through the five phases. And so it is a transition from the worldviews of spirits, demons, and ancestors, and it is the embrace of naturalistic philosophical explanations of the world like qi and yin and yang. And the focus of Confucianism is on regulating systems. They want to make sure that society, systems, the human body is functioning properly. Everything is upright. It is ordered the way that it's supposed to, because they believe that the way to create harmony and order in the world is by making sure that things are doing what they're supposed to do. If you're a father, you need to behave like a father. If you're a son, you need to behave like a son. If you're the emperor, you need to behave like a good emperor. And when people in the world start behaving the wrong way, things go wrong. There's chaos. In the same way, when things in your body are behaving in a wrong way, that's when you get illness. That's when you get disease. And so they're all about ordering things properly, and from that you get health. So that's just a little bit about how Confucianism is influential, but we're going to really dig into that next lecture. So Paul Unschold says the conceptual characteristics of the medicine of systematic correspondence also evolved during the declining Zhou dynasty, which we talked about. The major difference, however, is that the medicine of systematic correspondence reflects ideas and political structures resulting from the efforts to overcome the chaos of the warring states and from the subsequent conditions accompanying the first unification of China. So whereas like the demonological medicine and the demonology worldview is kind of like born from the chaos, the natural philosophies of the systematic correspondence medicine is kind of the way out of the chaos. It's the new worldview that takes us into a new reality, out from all of that civil war and chaos of the warring states. So they kind of represent different things in that sense. So, you know, the demonological medicine represents all of that civil warfare and hostility and distrust and the inability, like kind of the ultimate inevitability of being attacked by demons. It's just the world is so chaotic, you have no way to avoid it. And as an alternative to that, these natural philosophies say, no, actually, you can avoid it. You can maintain your health. Not It has nothing to do with demons. It has to do with um, ordering things properly, doing things at the right time, making sure that your chi is full and proper and harmonious. So it's kind of like a totally different worldview that embodies this new natural philosophy. So the paradigm of correspondences, the Paul Unschault says the phenomena of the visible and invisible world stand in mutual correspondence through their association with certain lines of correspondences. The paradigm of correspondences concludes that manipulations of one element in a specific line of correspondences can influence other elements of the same line. So we're trying to understand here, like, what does he mean by correspondences? And if you're a student of East Asian medicine, that may seem like an ambiguous term at first, but if you're a student of East Asian medicine, you'll know right away what he means, because it's how certain things correspond to yin, certain things correspond to yang. Or alternatively, if you want to talk about the five phases, some things are of the wood phase, some things are of the water phase. You know, the kidneys represent water, the liver represents wood, the heart represents fire. And so these are examples of lines of correspondences. So just like how the bitter flavor and the heart represent fire, and the sour flavor and the liver represent wood, those are examples of correspondences. And so that is how, out of this reality and worldview, they start to order and systematize all of these correspondences so that all of reality gets kind of systematized in this way. And by the way, here's a pretty cool book if you're ever interested in some of the the foundational theories and how they develop about East Asian medicine. This is a book that talks about systems of correspondence. It's by Manfred Porkert. And yeah, I recommend this book. This is a really cool book for further reading if anybody's interested. So some examples of types of correspondences. Let's just talk about Paul Unschault's first type of correspondence that he mentions out of those five real quick. So the first one is called magical correspondence. An example of this can be like contact magic. So contact or former union between two elements creates a relationship in which a manipulation of one of the elements, which are now, even though they're spatially separated, produces a visible effect upon the other. And so this is maybe not as common as some of the other things that we're going to get into when it comes to systematic correspondence, but for completeness sake, we want to just mention that there are these kinds of ideas, and you might think of something like a voodoo doll as sort of like representing that kind of a thing. It has this like quantum, almost this quantum mechanics kind of concept where things that are even completely separated by spatial distance are still connected to one another by some kind of magical connection. Then you have homeopathic ideas, which, for example, that can be expressed as like corresponds to like. So there are various examples of these that pop up throughout East Asian medicine at times. One example is, the anecdotal saying that, well, walnuts are good for the brain because they are shaped like brains. Or another example might be like, black beans are good for your kidneys because they look like the kidney. And then if you're into the Chinese herbal studies, you might think of, well, you have the herb bai shao and chur shao, which is like the different forms of peony root. Well, chur shao, the red peony root, is better for the blood. It benefits the blood in a way that maybe the white peony root doesn't, because it's red and the blood is red. So these are kinds of just examples of how this homeopathic sort of thinking gets applied here and there through the medicine. You know, it's there's various examples like that, oftentimes in herbal medicine, and so those are just some examples. I would say maybe those are not the most ubiquitous examples of correspondence in East Asian medicine. That's probably a lesser encountered example, but they do pop up every now and then, and some of them are strangely, accurate for what it's worth. And so this is actually an interesting, cool painting that I added just of Shen Nong. He's kind of the representative mythological deity of herbal medicine. So then we have ideas such as like macrocosmic interrelatedness. So this is in the same vein of magical correspondence. The belief in the macrocosmic interrelatedness of all things also permitted measures designed to preserve and influence collective existence. An example of this was the rain ceremony performed during periods of drought. So this has also kind of existed in many cultures throughout the world. I know Native Americans and various different cultures use kind of similar types of shamanistic practices. And basically, these kinds of ideas, these ways of thinking of, if I do this dance and I perform this ritual, it will influence the world out there, the macrocosm of the universe. This kind of magical thinking is really what kind of underlies a lot of shamanistic practices. Um, and so, such as a rain dance, this is kind of the underlying way of thinking about it. And so that's just a small part of it. And so that's kind of remnants of that Wu shamanism that comes and continues syncretically throughout the tradition. Even as we move forward into natural philosophy, there are some of these ideas. But now we are really going to dig into the more natural philosophy kinds of elements of the medicine of systematic correspondence. So, the rise of natural philosophy, the emergence and rise to conceptual dominance in Chinese natural philosophy of the ideology of systematic correspondence marks one of the most decisive periods of Chinese intellectual history, according to Paul Enschold. And this is just the transition of spirits, ancestors, demonic medicine, some of the more shamanistic ideas. The paradigm shifts at the end of the Warring States period and through the Warring States period philosophizing to this natural philosophy and systematic correspondence. And just to define natural philosophy for you real quick, natural philosophy is the early form of scientific inquiry that sought to understand the natural world through observation, reasoning, and the study of nature's laws, serving as the precursor to modern science. So, in a way, natural philosophy is a form of science. It's maybe not formalized in the way that science as we know it today is formalized. And what I mean by that is, we have this idea of the scientific method. It's a formal method that you do. You apply this method to reach knowledge, scientific knowledge. But the scientific method wasn't formalized. It wasn't developed until the 16th, 17th century in Europe. That wasn't a thing that existed in the world, but people still did science. They would observe nature. They would use their faculties of reason to try to understand patterns and understand the laws that are underlying why things happen the way they do. They're trying to basically understand like cosmology and physics in a very rudimentary way. And so these systems of correspondence are basically like logical systems that were developed. These natural philosophy theories were developed as sort of like a pre-modern science, a pre-modern rationalist logic that gets applied to nature, that gets applied to reality. And so this was a way for these people to understand the laws of nature. And they described it in terms of these systems of correspondence, in terms of qi, in the flow and the changes of qi over time, and the patterns that they observed in nature. So that is kind of just to flesh out what I mean by natural philosophy a bit. It's sort of like science, basically. So Now we're going to get into the types of correspondence, and this is really like the main gist of stuff. So you have yin-yang theory, and out of yin-yang theory really comes other more fleshed out versions of yin-yang theory that just get more and more complex. You have like fourfold divisions and sixfold divisions and eightfold systems. So whereas yin and yang is just a twofold system, it's like you have yin and you have yang. Well, you can combine those two things and make more complex combinations. Out of that, you can get 4, 6, 8, 12. There's many systems that get developed out of that. And then you have the 5-phase theory, which we're all somewhat familiar with. This is a picture of a mythological figure from Taoism called Pangu, who is thought to have separated heaven and earth, which are really just symbols for yin and yang. Heaven and earth, sky and earth are really kind of like archetypal symbols of yin and yang. So a lot of times in East Asian medicine and in the philosophy, you hear about heaven, earth. Those are just kind of like another way of saying yin and yang, essentially. And so also don't get confused by the term heaven. Whenever somebody's talking about heaven, they're not really talking about heaven in the biblical sense, because obviously that is not a theory or an idea which has come from China. They're talking about heaven as in like the sky, but in some senses maybe some kind of spiritual component as well. But it's, you can also translate the word that is being translated as heaven also translates as sky. So you can kind of think about it as like the sky above and the earth below. So the sky and heaven being yang and the earth being yin and solid. So in our book, Paul Unshold says that it was recognized that not just one, two, or a limited number of elements form a line of correspondence, but that most, if not all, natural occurrences and abstract concepts can be incorporated into a single system of correspondence. The basis of this step was provided by the doctrines of yin and yang and 5 phases. So yin and yang and the 5-phase theories really just kind of broke open Pandora's box, if you will. Those theories really are just the foundation. It's like out of that, you can basically systematize everything. You can classify everything according to yin and yang, everything according to the 5 phases, and they proceed to do that. That becomes the filter and the lens through which reality is seen. So let's look at yin and yang. These are the Chinese characters of yin and yang, and if you sort of like dissect the pictographic symbolism of the characters, you can kind of think of yin as the shady side of the hill, and you can think of yang as the sunny side of the hill. But the yin-yang correspondences refer to the ceaseless rise and fall of opposite yet complementary forces. They are dualistic lines of association which encompass numerous natural phenomena and abstract constellations, viewed as manifestations of two opposed yet complementary categories that span all existence. So this is really cosmological. This is like all of reality can be understood in terms of yin and yang, like the fundamental birth of the universe. This is like ancient Chinese cosmology. This was their version of physics. Like we have the Big Bang or whatever, like we have some kind of scientific sort of theory that fits our paradigm and our way of seeing reality out of science and materialistic science. They had the birth of the universe was basically understood in terms of qi and yin and yang and this dualistic, out of this dualism came the manifestation and evolution of everything. Just various different ways of combining yin and yang gives rise to every form of life in the world. And it also describes cyclical patterns that are evident in the movements of the tides. The tide goes in and it goes out with the moon. And in the alternation of day and night. So you wake up and it's and it starts to get light out, and then the sun goes up to the top, and now it's noon and it's very hot, and then it goes down and it's dusk, and then eventually at midnight it's super, super dark again. It's also with the whole yearly season. You have these yin yang correspondences, and this is from a article from our lesson if you're in our course. It's called The Philosophy of Yin and Yang. But these are two great tables that just kind of overview the most basic yin-yang correspondences. So for yin, that is like the substance, the form. For yang, that is more of like function and energy. Yin has the quality of growth, and yang has the quality of generation. Yin is very substantial. Yang is very non-substantial. So like think about it. The earth is solid, but heaven in the sky is airy. It's like, it's ethereal. You can't grab it. Yin is like matter. Yang is like energy. The qualities of yin is like contraction. So in the winter, everything gets cold and it contracts. Whereas yang is very expansive. And in the summer, everything gets warm and it unfreezes and it expands. Everything grows and blossoms and blooms. So then yin has the quality of descending. Yang has the quality of rising. You'll find yin below and yang above. And the archetype of yin would be water, while the archetype of yang would be fire. And then just some other classifications and correspondences of yin and yang. You have yin is represented by the darkness and yang is represented by the light. The moon is yin and the sun is yang. Femininity is yin and masculinity is yang. The shade is yin, and so that goes along with what we said before, where yin is like the shady side of the hill. Well, yang is the bright sunny side of the hill. Yin represents rest and stillness. Yang represents activity, movement. They also use yin and yang to talk about the various directions. You know, different directions of the compass are thought to exemplify yin and yang. Yin is the earth, yang is heaven. Even directions like right and left, flat and round, shapes, the symbolic quality of a shape is given qualities of yin and yang. So the earth is always symbolized by a square, whereas heaven is often symbolized by a circle in ancient Chinese cosmology. So these are all just examples of how yin would be the more material, dense aspects of the universe, and yang represents the more non-material, rarefied aspects of the universe. So fundamentally, this is like a cosmology. This is a way of understanding the universe. And then it gets applied to medicine. And so this is just another little example of how yin-yang represents these cycles, these cyclical transformations that are observed in the world. So each of these columns is basically, they're all kind of resonant with one another. You know, when you're born and when you're a child, it's like you're in the spring of your life. It's the morning, it's the dawn, it's the new yang has just emerged. Then when you're in your adulthood, it's like the summer of your life. It's like the noon of the day when the sun is at its height. This is when yang becomes mature. It's the older yang. Then when you're in your later adulthood, you know, you're starting to get a little gray or whatever. It's like the autumn season, and it's like the dusk of the day when the sun is starting to set. And this is when the yin has become newly emerged. And then when you're old and you're sort of like almost maybe at the end of your lifespan, this is like the winter of the seasons. This is the winter of your life. It is midnight, and this is the maturity of yin. So yin and yang gets applied to all of these cyclical cycles that are observed throughout nature, throughout life, on a day-to-day basis, on a yearly basis, and on a whole life scale basis. So that's yin and yang Let's just take a brief moment to talk about the Huangde Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's inner classic. The Huangde Neijing is perhaps the oldest textual document of a comprehensive application of yin-yang doctrine to medicine. This is a heterogeneous collection of 81 treatises, some of them are no longer existing, whose earliest portions pertain to the concepts of systematic correspondence, and they may date from the 2nd century BC. So a little bit about the Neijing. The Huangde Neijing is commonly referred to as the classic throughout much of the entirety of Chinese medicine history, and it in many ways is the root of the medicine. It's constantly being referenced. It's like this is the ultimate original source of medical knowledge according to this new paradigm of thinking. And it's broken up into 2 different books, if you will. So it's like one book, but then within that one book there are 2 separate books, okay? And so the first book is called the Su Wen, and that translates as basic questions. And that's because the way that the book is written, it's like a question and answer dialogue between the mythical protagonist who is named the Yellow Emperor. This is like the mythical emperor, and he's having a dialogue with his medical advisor, and his medical advisor's name is Qi Bo. So it's actually a really cool thing to read. It's like the emperor is asking his most trusted medical advisor, the guy with the biggest medical brains of the whole empire at the time, and he's asking him all these questions about medicine, and then Qi Bo tells him the answers. So in this very interesting dialogue, question and answer format, they're going through all these different topics that pertain to medicine, and Qi Bo is giving him all the deets, all the good answers and knowledge. And then once he gets a great answer, the Yellow Emperor is like, oh, wow, I feel so enlightened by your amazing answer. We need to take this knowledge and store it in like the golden chest of the Emperor's medicine cabinet and all this stuff. So it's a really cool book to read. So that's the Su Wen. That's the basic questions half of the book. And then the other half is called the Ling Shu, and that can translate as spiritual pivot. And so this is the other part of the book, and the Ling Shu is like all about acupuncture. This is like the origin book of acupuncture, the first book that really lays it out of how does one do acupuncture. It's really also kind of very much in this question and answer format between the Yellow Emperor and Qi Bo, but it's all about acupuncture theory, acupuncture practice, techniques about acupuncture, very nitty-gritty details about qi and the meridians and how to perform acupuncture from a technical standpoint. They talk about different kinds of needles, different kinds of acupuncture techniques, why one would do this technique versus that technique, what they do, how they work. Basically, if you're an acupuncturist, you have to read the Ling Shu. It's like this is the root of acupuncture. So altogether, though, the Neijing, it's really representative of like Paul Unschul says it's this heterogeneous book. It's because it's really syncretic. It's like, who wrote this book? It was probably written maybe by multiple people who have different strains of thought, and it's very syncretic. They bring together a lot of these ideas. It's informed by many of these naturalist philosophies at a fundamental level that maybe we were talking about in our previous lectures. And it's representative of this Huanglao thought, this kind of syncretic tradition of thinking of these various philosophies of like, there's influences from like Confucianism and legalism and Taoism and yin and yang and 5 phases, and it all kind of comes together and gets put down as this really eclectic, inspiring, original blending of all the most all the best ideas of medicine at that time period, and it kind of sets the tone for East Asian medicine going forward. It's like, this is the starting point of the medicine of systematic correspondences. If you want to read the Neijing, there's some different translations out there, but in my opinion, the best translations of of the Neijing are by Paul Unshold, the guy who is the author of our textbook. And so he translated the Ling Shu. He translated the Su Wen. He also has a third book that's sort of more just like about the medicine of systematic correspondences and about the Su Wen, which it's called like Nature and Imagery in the Su Wen or something. Um, but he has the best translations. It's one. It's to be just a little bit critical of it. It's a little bit kind of like he's a. I don't know that Paul Unshold is an acupuncturist. I don't know that he's a practicing medicine person himself, but he's a really genius linguist, and he's really well versed in Chinese and ancient Chinese. So the translations are great, but there are moments where it sort of feels like maybe he would have had a little bit of a better context if he was an acupuncturist. But to be fair, like the work that he put into these books, like these books are amazing, these translations, and they're probably in the library. If you're at the Wan Institute, I definitely recommend go read these books in the library. And yeah, you got to read the Neijing at some point. It's like you should probably read it multiple times over and over through your life. In my opinion, every acupuncturist should read the Neijing, both the Su Wen and the Ling Shu. Read it, read the whole thing, then let a year or two go by, and then read the whole thing again. We're just gonna real quick just kind of overview and touch on some topics that come up in the Neijing. So the Neijing, it talks about aligning with natural cycles. So ideas of following the seasonal influences and the circadian rhythms of the day or the season. And there's practical advice for patients and practitioners to tailor diets to the season. There's also practical advice about, maybe how different people living in different climates might be prone to different kinds of diseases. And also different treatment methods emerged because if some people living in the south part of China, they're living in a hot, damp condition, they might get certain illnesses. Some people living in the north part of China, they live in the steppes and it's very cold, it gets super cold up there, they're more prone to getting cold diseases. So the various parts of China is such a huge place that even the whole climates of different areas would vary so much that in the Neijing they theorized that this was why different treatments originated. They do moxibustion up in the north because it's very cold, etc., etc. They talk about in the Neijing the balance of yin and yang. So you diagnose and treat yin and yang imbalances, and that is the cause and the root of disease. They also talk about regulating the flow of qi. So by ensuring smooth qi flow through the meridians, that is a way of maintaining health. You can do that through exercises. You can help regulate it with things like acupuncture and moxibustion. By removing blockages which cause pain and organ dysfunction, you can treat them with acupuncture and herbs. So they talk about harmonizing wuxing in the 5 phases to address various organ imbalances. They prioritize prevention. So by emphasizing lifestyle adjustments, you can preserve your jing, which is like your essence, and you can prevent disease. So, for example, moderating diet, sleep, exercise, all aligns with the concept of Wu Wei, which we're going to talk about in our Taoism lecture later on. Then they talk about holistic diagnosis. So that's this whole diagnostic method in the Neijing, where you're assessing the whole person. You're assessing their emotions, their environment, their organ systems, their pulse. All of these things give you information, and which once you have that information, you can apply it using the systematic correspondence. Different pulses relate to different things according to that correspondences. Different tongue patterns relate to different things according to systematic correspondences. It might relate to different organs, different phases, different elements. Maybe it's yin, maybe it's yang. They talk about treating the root and the branch. They distinguish the two. That you want to address the underlying causes, but you also want to address the symptoms, and those are the root and the branch. They talk about this thing called the spirit, and you want to cultivate the spirit. You want to support the heart's shen, the heart spirit, to which is really the root of mental clarity. It's your emotional balance. They also talk about how acupuncturists need to cultivate their own spirit. You need to be very centered and focused when you're doing acupuncture. They also adapt to individual constitutions. So treatments get tailored to the patient's unique pattern of qi. The whatever's going on in terms of yin and yang, in terms of their 5 phases, by recognizing the individual differences that occur in each patient, you can respond and you can treat their disease. Now we're talking about the Ling Shu, and the Ling Shu goes further into things like the acupuncture meridian pathways. So the 12 main meridians, it talks about the pathways, it describes them, and various things that have to do with each one. And it talks about regulating the qi flow and using acupuncture points to do that. By regulating the qi in blood, it prioritizes smooth flow of qi and blood to prevent stagnation, and that's what causes pain and disease. And so here's a quote from the Su Wen. It says, "If there is free flow, there is no pain. If there is no free flow, there is pain." That's like such a great quote, you know? I say that to patients all the time when we talk about the nature of pain. That's really just gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? They go further and talk about yin and yang in terms of how to do acupuncture, how to do needling. And so they apply this in various ways. You know, for instance, if the disease is in the upper part of the body, you want to treat maybe below. Like if you have a really bad headache or you're dizzy, maybe you do liver 3 on the foot. If the pain is on the left side, you treat the right side, and vice versa. It talks about treating various meridians to treat other meridians. So there's many different treatment strategies and techniques that are outlined in the Ling Shu. Talks about 9 different needles, and it talks about various techniques that you can do with them. So this has to do with just normal acupuncture with the regular type of needle that we're used to, but it also talks about lancets. It talks about bloodletting and various different types of needles that are used for different purposes. And so, you know, it's talking about draining and tonifying and bloodletting and releasing stagnant blood. Specifically, it talks a lot about tonification and sedation. This becomes a very big topic throughout history. You know, it gives you in the Ling Shu methods for tonifying deficient qi and sedating and clearing and releasing excess qi. So various types of needle insertion and techniques with the needles are thought to do one or the other or different things, you know, maybe by certain types of twisting of the needle or lifting of the needle, inserting it, you know, maybe taking it out and then going back in, or going in and then taking it out. Different depths of maybe the needle insertion have to do with sedation or tonification, or if the disease is maybe in the yang part of the body, you might want to treat the yang part of the body by treating with a very superficial needle, because that's the yang of the body. If the disease is in the yin, maybe you want to get to the, if you want to get to the disease, you want to treat into the yin portion of the body, which is more of a deeper insertion. These are all just like ways that yin and yang gets applied to all these different ways of doing acupuncture. It's like they get really into the nitty-gritty of it in the Ling Shu. And so that's why the Ling Shu is like so fun to read if you're an acupuncturist. This is where it all starts and comes from. And they get really deep into various meridian-based types of needling. It's like you start to learn about how the meridians intersect and connect and their relationships and the correspondences of the acupuncture meridians in the medicine of systematic correspondences. So you learn how to treat the meridians and the collaterals and to regulate qi and blood and to specifically target various pathways and organs. Some more concepts from the Ling Shu. You get the 5 transport points, the Shu points, all those really important points on your hands and feet that you are forced to memorize as an acupuncturist, because they are like the most important acupuncture points, those super important distal points the Jing wells, the Ying springs, the Shu streams, the Jing rivers, and the He seas. So if you're an acupuncture student, you got to memorize all those points, and all those points go all the way back to the Ling Shu. And it just goes to show the medicine of systematic correspondences, because those all get assigned 5-phase correspondences. It also, the Ling Shu also talks about the back shu points and the front mu points. Those are the points on the bladder meridian on the back, and the various points on the front of the body, and these influence the deeper parts of like the organ chi. And then it talks about superficial versus deep needling, where superficial needling, like I said, is for yang conditions. Deep needling gets to the yin conditions. And then there's the importance of being focused, having your spirit focused while you're an acupuncturist. And they talk about this so eloquently in these books, where they're like, you have to just be so tranquil when you're an acupuncturist. You have to be able to notice minute details and be aware of very fine reactions and subtle things that are happening during the acupuncture. So it just goes to show that it ties in too to things like meditation, and like there are these spiritual practices that are part of East Asian medicine, and it has to do with also being a good acupuncturist. These things help us to become better. We become more focused in what we're doing. Okay, so let's look at how maybe, we're going to go a little bit further out of yin and yang, right? So you have yin and yang, but it can also be expanded into other systems. So this is one called the sixfold categorization. And honestly, this is like maybe one of the most important things to learn as you grow as an acupuncturist and an herbalist, because the 6 divisions is one of the most important theories. It has to do with acupuncture. It has to do with herbalism. When you apply yin and yang to the acupuncture meridians, there's 12 acupuncture meridians, and there's of the hands and the feet. And so when you apply yin and yang, you get 6 pairs of acupuncture meridians. You get the Tai Yin, the Yang Ming, the Xiao Yin, the Tai Yang, the Shui Yin, and the Xiao Yang. So, we all know that the lung and the large intestine are a yin and yang pair with one another, right? They're both the metal phase. But we can also do a yin to the yin pair and a yang to the yang pair. Because as we also know, the lung and the spleen are yin partners. That's the Tai Yin. Or the large intestine and the stomach are Yang Ming. The heart and the kidney is Xiao Yin. The small intestine and the urinary bladder are Tai Yang. And the pericardium and the liver are Shui Yin. And the triple burner and the gallbladder are Xiao Yang. So these are really important connections, because you can treat diseases utilizing these connections. This is how, like, Dr. Tan's balance acupuncture methods, for instance, are like fully based on this theory. Some of his systems of treatment are like 100% just based on this theory. If the large intestine's sick, you can treat the lung. Or if you want, you can treat the stomach. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. Or, just as another example, you can treat the opposite of its time. So the large intestine is thought to be at its height at 5 to 7 a.m. Well, treat the kidney, which is the opposite. So kidney and large intestine connect. There's different ways to connect acupuncture meridians for treatment purposes, utilizing this 6-division framework. And then also, if you're into the herbal medicine, this 6-division, this 6-fold categorization becomes the foundation of basically herbal medicine theory. Because in one of the most important books of all time, it's called the Shanghan Lun. We're going to talk about that book more in lesson 7. Zhang Zhongjing, who's the author of the Shanghan Lun, uses this 6-fold categorization to basically come up with some of the most revolutionary ideas of herbal medicine theory of all time. It's like, so this stuff is super important, both for acupuncture and herbal medicine, the sixfold categorizations. And ultimately, you're going to want to, as an acupuncturist and an herbalist, memorize what is Tai Yin, what is Shao Yin, what is Yang Ming, what is Tai Yang, etc., etc. And and that's because that's how this balance method, we're not going to go too deep into this because it's like, I'm not here to teach you all about how the balance method works. It's kind of like, you can make a whole course about the balance method. It's like Dr. Tan wrote books about this, right? So, and you may not have learned about this in school yet, but this is all based on the six-fold categorization of the acupuncture meridians. And it'll tell you why the heart can treat the gallbladder, because they're opposites. And like I said, the large intestine and the kidney can treat each other because they're opposites. You can also find other ways of treating each other, like the liver and the pericardium, because that is the Shui Yin. So if you know that the foot Shui Yin and the hand Shui Yin is the liver and the pericardium, you can treat each meridian with one another. But if you want to treat the liver a different way, maybe you don't want to use the pericardium meridian, you can use its other partner, its yang partner. You can use the gallbladder meridian because liver and gallbladder are partners, yin and yang partners. So you have yin and yin partners, yin and yang partners. You also have yang and yang partners. So gallbladder and sanjiao treat each other. There's so many different ways that you can use this theory. I use this every single day in the acupuncture clinic without question. There is not a single day that goes by that I don't use this concept in some way to find acupuncture points that are going to fix people's problems, like all sorts of problems. So if you want to learn more about that, about the balance method, which is all based on that sixfold categorization of systematic correspondences, you can check out this book by Dr. Tan. I think this book over here, the Foundations book, is also by maybe his wife. And but I really love this Acupuncture 1, 2, 3 book. One of my buddies turned me on to that, and yeah, it's great. I utilize it every single day. But it's not just sixfold categorizations. We can also use yin and yang to come up with many other things. And basically, the idea is that this all just comes from the I Ching that we talked about in our previous lecture. That book, the I Ching, is basically the foundation of the systematization of yin and yang. Because from the this is like the cosmology, right? Out of the I Ching here. You have from the ultimate supreme ultimate, which is called the Taiji. That's like the origin of the universe. It's like what happens before the Big Bang, right? It's like what happens before the creation of the universe. You just have this primordial, unmanifested, complete potential. And from that emerges yin and yang. And then from yin and yang emerges more differentiated yin and yang. You have big yang, you have the great yang, you have the small yang, you have you have the great yang, you have the small yin, you have the small yang, and you have the great yin. So it's like super yang, super yin, and then two in the middle. So this is just a different way of like categorizing things. You can start to break things into more fine detail, basically. It's like if you wanted to take something and analyze it, you could start and just use this, the yin-yang model. Well, is it yin or is it yang? That's a pretty easy, broad brush way of like looking at something, right? It's either yin or yang primarily. Well, if you want to get a little more granular with it, you can say, well, it's really, it's yang, but it's really like Tai Yang. It's like super yang versus maybe like sort of yang. So the way that you could apply this, for instance, is like if you want to talk about Tai Yang, that's like the summer, super duper yang. Versus Shao Yang, that's like the spring. It's yang, but it's only like just getting there, Versus Tai Yin, that's like the winter. It's super duper. We're in the middle of yin, ultimate yin. Versus maybe the autumn. It's starting to get pretty yin out there, but it's not quite winter yet, So that's a way of using the fourfold categorization of yin and yang. You can take it even further, and then that's where they come up with this whole idea of the Bagua, which is like the 8 trigrams of the I Ching. We're not going to get into a whole, this isn't a course about like learning the I Ching. Like I said, each of these concepts could be like their own course. It's just, I'm trying to just like introduce each of them to you. But this is basically the 8 trigrams of the I Ching. And it emerges from just yin and yang, unbroken and broken lines being stacked upon each other, and you get more and more complex ways of classifying things. So the I Ching is an entire study to itself, but it's really like the very foundation of East Asian philosophy, cosmology, its metaphysics. It takes yin-yang theory to its extreme. And it has applications in everything, in every sphere of life, you know, but especially including acupuncture. And these are the systems that are used to systematically categorize correspondences in the entire natural world. And these two pictures up here are pictures of the Bagua, of the I Ching Bagua. There's two different versions of them. But just to show how important this is, just to like East Asian philosophy and culture in general, you know, the flag of South Korea basically has a yin yang in the middle and some trigrams. So this is like very, very paradigmatic, deep level, deeply rooted stuff in East Asian philosophy. Let's just take a minute to talk about the 5 phases, which is the other really important system of correspondences. You got the 5 phases: fire, earth, metal, water, wood. You have a cycle of generation where they're creating one another. And then you also have a cycle of destruction where they overcome one another. This is used in acupuncture. Once again, this is a system and a theory which can be applied to acupuncture on a daily basis. There's whole theories about this. We're going to talk about some later. For instance, Korean Sa'am acupuncture is basically like directly inspired by the 5-phase theory, and it uses the shoe points, the distal shoe points on the hands and the feet, because as we know from our trusty chart from Peter Deadman here, this is, you know, if you go into your Manual of Acupuncture book by Deadman, he lists out all of the shoe points of the yin and the yang channels. You've got your Jing wells, your Ying springs, your shu streams, your Jing rivers, and your he seas. And these are all the distal points of the hands and the feet. And that's how they all correspond to metal, water, wood, fire, and earth. And, you know, that varies for the yin and the yang. But this all has to do with the systematic correspondence of the 5 phases applied to acupuncture points. So the systematic correspondence, it's basically integral to almost all of the most foundational acupuncture theories. Another way that the 5 phases applies to correspondences is just, you know, corresponding colors. For instance, wood is green, fire is red, earth is yellow, metal's white, water's black. You know, in this chart, they talk about different like archetypes, but you could also apply it to the seasons. You could apply it to the organs. You could apply it to the tissues, which is a very important thing. You know, the tendons resonate with the wood. The fire resonates with the blood vessels. The earth resonates with the muscles and the flesh. The metal resonates with the skin. The water resonates with the bones. That has direct application to how you needle, how you do acupuncture. You know, if you want to treat, if you needle to the bone, you know, for instance, there's some Master Dung points where he says you want to needle and tap the bone. If you're trying to treat the kidneys and the water, you might want to tap the bone. If you want to treat the wood, you might want to choose a point that is situated within a tendon, and vice versa. So all of these systematic correspondences, the tastes, the emotions that we all learn, the sensory organs, all of these things relate to each element, each phase. This is all exemplifying the medicine of systematic correspondences using the Wuxing. So altogether, though, these are all different theories. Yin and yang is a different theory than the five phase theory, but they all coexist because this is an element of syncretism that is operating in East Asian medicine. As this is a recurring theme, and Paul Unshold says whenever antagonistic sub-paradigms emerged within one of the major paradigms, the resulting contradictions appear to have been solved only rarely, if ever, in a matter familiar to the historian of medicine and science in the West. This is a little bit confusing for people, but that's just how it is. It's a different. We don't necessarily need to resolve the discrepancies. They might never get resolved. There's a continuous tendency towards syncretism of all ideas that exist within accepted limits. So as we learn all of these various sub-paradigms, you've got yin and yang, you've got the sixfold, the fourfold, you've got the Bagua, you've got the five phases, you've even got other more esoteric ones like, they have the 12 animal astrological theories, and they have the 10 branches and the 12 stems. And there's just an ever expanding amount of systems and theories, and various different ways to apply them to the world and reality. They may not all agree. They may not all. They might have contradictions amongst one another, but ultimately they exist syncretically under the umbrella of the medicine of systematic correspondences. So now let's move on to the concept of qi in the classics. This is a picture of the character for qi. It's you can kind of see it's like a grain of cooked rice, and it's in some sort of a vessel, and you can see that it's giving off steamy vapors. So that's how they write the concept of qi in Chinese, which I've always found so fascinating. It's really, I love the Chinese language. In the Ling Shu, the Yellow Emperor says, "What is it to say when you? What is qi when? Sorry, what is qi to say?" He's basically asking, "What is qi?" And then Chibo responds, "When the upper burner opens and sends something out to pass on the flavors of the five grains, to steam the skin, to fill the body, to moisten the body hair, in the same way as mist and dew provide humidity, then that is what is called qi." We're just going to look at real quick just some passages of old Chinese texts about qi. Now this is another one from the Zhuangzi. This is an old Taoist text. He says, "The great clod," which is like another way of saying like the planet, the earth. "The great clod belches out breath," which is another way of saying qi, "and its name is wind. So long as it doesn't come forth, nothing happens. But when it does, then all of the hollows begin to howl. Have you not heard how it continues at length?" This is chapter 2 of Zhuangzi. So this passage is sort of like it exemplifies the early philosophical view of wind as a dynamic manifestation of qi out in the world. And the universal vital breath, the vapor animating nature of it, that's like the vapors coming off of the cooked rice. This passage is frequently cited in scholarship as evidence of qi's origins in ideas such as like breath or vapor or wind. And it sort of bridges pre-medical cosmic ideas of qi with the vital energy theories that come to encompass East Asian medicine when we're talking about qi. So now here's another one. This one's from Mencius, a Confucian philosopher. So in answer to a question from Gong Sun Cho about how he maintained an unperturbed mind, Mencius replies, "The will is the leader of the qi, and the qi is what fills the body. Since the will is supreme and the qi is secondary, I say maintain firm the will and do no violence to the qi. When the will is given primacy, it sets the qi in motion. When the qi is given primacy, it sets the will in motion." Gong Sun Shos then went on to ask about the great flood-like qi, and Mencius replied, "It is difficult to explain. This, the qi, It is exceedingly great and exceedingly strong. Nourish it with rectitude and place no obstacle in its path, and it will fill all between heaven and earth. This, the chi, it is on a par with righteousness, and the way, in that without it, one is in a state of starvation. So here Mencius is talking about the chi. It's related to your willpower, your inner condition. Um, you can rectify it. He's saying you want to preserve it. It has to do with, it's on par with righteousness, which is like the most fundamental thing of Confucianism. So he's basically saying chi is super duper important. Here's another old passage about chi from the book called Guanzi, which we mentioned in a previous lecture as like a syncretic sort of like Huang Lao book. He says, "It is ever so that the vital essence, the chi of things, is what gives them life. Below it gives life to the 5 grains. Above it creates the ranked stars. When floating between heaven and earth, we call it ghost or spirit. When stored in the breast, we call it sageliness. Thus, man's vital force, his chi, how bright, as if mounting the heavens, how dark, as if entering an abyss, how vast, as if filling an ocean, how compact, as if contained within the self. Thus, this vital force, never to be restrained by physical strength, it may be brought to rest by spiritual power. Never to be summoned by one's call, it may be made welcome by one's power of awareness. Respectfully preserve and never lose it. Such is called perfecting one's power. Power being perfected, wisdom develops, and all things may be fully comprehended." So, once again, the chi is essential. It's like your spiritual power as a human being comes from preserving your chi and perfecting it. And it's like the chi is everything. It's he's also kind of talking in this beginning part how when it's floating between heaven and earth, maybe he's talking about wind. He calls it ghosts and spirits. So kind of like this passage I think of, it's like sort of like this is a bridge between when we're talking about ghosts and spirits. It becomes sort of ideas of the wind, which sort of morph into ideas of chi and like vital energy, and what becomes, it gives life to, foods. Like you can think of like a food that is without chi and a food that is with chi. And that's why I think it's so profound that the concept of chi, it's like this is a cooked grain of rice. It's not just an uncooked grain of rice. The function of cooking it uh, unlocks its chi. So this is a really cool classic text example of somebody in the philosophical schools talking about chi. And now for our last thing that I'm going to quote to you. This is a long passage. This is the first passage of the Neijing Su Wen. And I'm just going to read this part of this chapter for you. Let me just take a sip real quick. The Yellow Emperor says, "I have heard that the people of high antiquity, in the sequences of spring and autumn, all exceed 100 years. But in their movements and activities there was no weakening. As for the people today, after 1/2 of 100 years, the movements and activities of all of them weaken. Is this because the times are different, or is it that the people have lost this ability?" Chibo responded, "The people of high antiquity, those who knew the way, they modeled their behavior on yin and yang, and their eating and drinking was moderate. Their rising and their resting had regularity. They did not tax themselves with meaningless work. Hence, they were able to keep physical appearance and spirit together, and to exhaust the years allotted to them by heaven. Their lifespan exceeded 100 years before they departed. The fact that people of today are different is because they take wine as an ordinary beverage, and they adopt absurd behavior as regular behavior. They are drunk when they enter the woman's chamber. Though they lust, through their lust they exhaust their essence. Through their wastefulness they dissipate their true chi. They do not know how to maintain fullness, and they engage their spirit when it is not the right time. They make every effort to please their hearts, but they oppose the true happiness of life. Rising and resting miss their terms. Hence, it is only 1/2 of 100 years and they weaken. Now, when the sages of high antiquity taught those below, they always spoke to them about the following: the depletion evils and the robber winds. There are being there are specific times when to avoid them. Quiet peacefulness, absolute emptiness, the true chi follows these states. When essence and spirit are guarded internally, where could a disease come from? Hence, the mind is relaxed and one has few desires. The heart is at peace and one is not in fear. The physical appearance is taxed, but it is not tired. The chi follows its appropriate course, and therefrom results compliance. Everything follows one's wishes. In every respect, one achieves what one longs for. Hence, they considered their food delicious, they accepted their clothes, and they enjoyed the common. Those of higher and those of lower status did not long for each other. The people therefore were called natural. Hence, cravings and desires could not tax their eyes. The excess evil could not confuse their hearts. The stupid and the knowledgeable, the exemplary and the non-exemplary, none was in fear of other beings. Hence, they were one with the way. That by which all of them were able to exceed a lifespan of 100 years, while their movements and activities did not weaken. That was the fact that their virtue was perfect, and they did not meet with danger. So that's just like such a cool passage from the Huang de Neijing Su Wen, sort of exemplifying the idea of qi, the idea of yin and yang, and the medicine of systematic correspondences. It encapsulates so many of the ideas of the Neijing and just that one passage of, how do people back then remain healthy and how do people these days become sick? I just love that passage. It touches on so many things. I'll just leave it at that. We don't have to dissect it and go too crazy over analyzing it, but let's just conclude our lecture today, okay? So in conclusion, the medicine of systematic correspondence, which is the name Paul Unshold gives the paradigm of medicine underlying East Asian medicine, develops out of a syncretism of natural philosophies arising out from the Warring States period. Systematic correspondence refers to lines of correspondences such as yin, yang, wu, xing, and the various systems of correspondence that develop out of these ideas, these sub-paradigms. And then we have the Neijing, which exemplifies the syncretic Huang Lao thought of its times, and it is the first most important classical text of East Asian medicine, of the whole shebang, of acupuncture, of everything. And then we have the concept of qi, which Unshold defines as finest matter influences, and it becomes the basic functional concept for this medicine of systematic correspondences, for this paradigm. So those are the main takeaways of the paradigm of systematic correspondences. Now, for our remaining lectures, we're going to be, in most of them, digging into more ideas which kind of flower out of this paradigm, this medicine of systematic correspondences. As the years pass and the centuries unfold through the history of China and East Asian medicine, there will be more and more theories, more and more nuanced theories that develop out of this basic foundation of the medicine of systematic correspondences. We're going to look at these in various different lectures. In our next lecture, we're going to look specifically at Confucianism, just so we understand, hey, how does Confucianism fit into this puzzle? How does Confucianism as a philosophy fit into East Asian medicine? Because it's perhaps the most important philosophy of all that influenced Eastern Asia. And then in lesson 7, we're going to really dig into some of the really exemplary ideas of the medicine of systematic correspondence, which come out of the Han Dynasty, which is the big, most important dynasty of China. This is going to be maybe the ultimate of ancient classical Chinese East Asian medicine ideas. A lot of them come out of the Han Dynasty. So that's what's coming up next in our next 2 lectures. And then we've got many more beyond that. We're going to have 14 in total. So we're making our way through. We're getting there bit by bit. So thank you everybody for joining me on this lesson about the medicine of systematic correspondences, and I will see you soon for our next ones. Okay? Have a great day.